good morning. This is Vaidyanathan Iyer from the Indian Express. As we kind of look at the newspapers today, the big story in Indian Express is about this massive data leak that the Indian Express has got, along with few other media organizations across the world. It has been a collaborative exercise, but what is most interesting aspect about this leak is the data dump belongs to an organized company called Zenhua Data, which has a website called chinarevival.com. And this company has been monitoring, set up just about 2-3 years ago in Shenzhen. This company has been monitoring millions of individuals and entities across the world, including India. The names in the India list, as you would have seen in the newspaper today, are cut across political parties, thought leaders, businessmen, and even small and petty criminals. So from the President of India to the Prime Minister, to the cabinet ministers, to chief ministers across states, to leaders in the opposition, to thought leaders, the list actually virtually is the who's who in India. Joining me in this discussion, we have Christopher Balding, who is a professor at Fulbright University in Vietnam. Angus Grigg, who's the National Affairs correspondent. He's a celebrated journalist and a Walkley Award winner, an investigative reporter who worked on this project for Australian Financial Review, and Robert Potter, who's a cybersecurity expert and also helped the collaboration in terms of putting together the technology for access to all journalists. Thank you for joining in, all of you. Let me start quickly with Chris. Chris, can you tell me very briefly, how you got the data, about its source? What was your first reaction when you kind of got this huge data called the Overseas Key Information Database of China Revival?
Sure. So last year I had done some research on Huawei, and during that process I had been provided a leaked database from a Chinese website of millions of Chinese CVs that helped give us a better picture into what Huawei was doing and some of the state-related activities that their employees were engaging in. And out of that process, as I was talking to different individuals, one individual notified me of a database that they had that was being collected by Shenzhen Zhenhua. And out of this, they provided me the database, and I started looking at it. And I think what first struck me about it was its breadth and depth of data that it had. And I realized that, to be honest, even though I knew China, I realized that it was out of my depth of expertise to give this database the full analysis that it really needed to understand what they were doing. And through a series of interactions, I was introduced to Rob Potter, who you mentioned earlier has done a great job providing access and help bringing expertise here that I would not be able to provide.
Rob, quickly getting you in, what was the challenge for you in organizing this data? It was huge, and it had, I'm sure that it was not in a format where you could, where others could see and make sense of it immediately. How long did it take for you to make it readable for journalists like us?
So thanks for the question. It's great to be here. The database we received was in a pretty interesting state, in as much as in its original form, it would have had a software platform that sat over the top of it. But the copy of the data was the back end of the database for all the records. So what we had to do, we were handed it in a very flat state. We had to work on it for a number of months in order to restore it to pretty close to its original form. Even then, because we're dealing with a database of a pretty significant size, our estimates are that we were able to restore around about 10% of the personal profiles that were contained within the original. About 250,000 were fully restored. The company claims to about 2.5 million character records in its original state. As a result of that, we put it into a system that was easy to search, and then hosted it centrally so that the journalists like yourself would be able to work on it in a reasonably straightforward way using a common platform and pre-normalized data.
Thanks. And as you know, I'm really glad that you could join us in the show. I'm sure that you are battling deadlines to be publication soon. Tell us, Angus, how long have you been working on this project? Because we have been interacting over calls for the last 2 months, over video chats. How long has it been for you? What are the big findings that Financial Review has got in this investigation?
Yeah, thanks, Vide. Look, it's been a good project for a couple of months. We've been working on this, trying to understand the data and just going through it and trying to, I guess, get a better understanding of where the targets are. And I guess sort of two things really jump out at us. Firstly is the power of open source data, how much sort of raw and really valuable intelligence can be gleaned from open sources. And so that was probably the first big takeout of us. I guess the other one, as Chris mentioned, is just the breadth of this thing. It's just enormous. Like the Australian list that has been restored is 35,000 people.
Wow.
Yes. And so, potentially there was, as many as 350,000 Australians on this list. So that probably suggests to us that Australia may have been overrepresented for a country of 25, 26 million people. That seems to be, a fair chunk of the population. That probably signals to us that the sort of China focus on Australia is very strong, given the trading relationship and all the sort of difficult and prickly bilateral interactions we've had over the last couple of months or couple of years with China, really. I guess the other big takeout for us is the laser-like focus on technology and Australian technology entrepreneurs. So in the Australian list, people who run big data companies, people who run energy technology companies, space is another big one, space technology, renewable energy, as I said. So there's a really big focus on technology, big focus also on space, retired officials as well, as you said, petty criminals. But really the big takeout is technology and this sort of thirst for technology, and I guess also resources, natural resources, uranium mines and things like that.
Look, quick follow-up, I guess, are there big politicians, ministers in the government also in the Australian list?
Oh, of course. So the Prime Minister here, Scott Morrison, he has 20 pages of profiling in his database, everything from his surprise election victory to his interactions with Donald Trump around Australia's involvement in the space program. There is the former head of the Australian Navy, the former head of the Special Forces here, another politician in Australia, Andrew Hastie, who is the chairman of our joint intelligence committee, if you like. He's on there along with his family members. So yeah, look, there's a very, I guess, like you said, the who's who of Australia is pretty strongly represented. That is not such a surprise to us that those people are on there. The opposition leader, Anthony Albanese. The surprise to us really was these lots of very unknown technology entrepreneurs who have sort of cutting edge technology that is maybe at an early stage and is yet to come to the public market. And so has been a bit below the radar here in Australia, but obviously not missed by the Chinese.
You have been in China for a while, almost a decade. And open source intelligence, from the way we looked at data and we kind of figured out how they have used social media platforms, and all that is available on the internet to gather intelligence about, say, to track people or targets, as they call it. So what kind of advantage do you think this lends to China, especially when all of it is open source, like all of it is available? What do you think is the strategic advantage for China to do that?
So I think one thing, there is this very valid question, well, if it's just open source information, if it's just open source data, and we should say that's a not insignificant percentage of this is what we would consider non-public information. but most of it is open source information. What is the strategic value? What is the interest of that? And I think there's a couple of important things to know. China has an entire government department called the United Front Organization, which is actually dedicated to influencing foreign institutions, foreign individuals. And on top of that, they dedicate vast sums of money to intelligence and foreign affairs through other agencies to both influence foreign individuals and institutions. Literally billions and billions and billions of dollars a year just dedicated to influencing individuals and institutions to see things China's way. That could mean intelligence operations. This company claims to work with Chinese intelligence services and the military. This also could spill over into influence operations. We see a major focus on academia, think tanks, ex-politicians, which can really provide insight into how policy is made in a country. They can influence that policy in a country. And so I think we need to understand that this is not done for, reasons that a Google or a Facebook might do to, get you to buy more things. But it is done to influence individuals and institutions to change policy to make it in a more China-friendly manner.
Robert, we have kind of seen that the partners of these companies. We looked at their history, and we kind of it reveals that they have many of them have got stakes by the Chinese establishment, by the government organizations, and also they are affiliated to the party itself, the Communist Party. From the IT perspective, Bob, do you see that the IT evidence kind of leaves footprints? Is that such evidence that links the flow of data, or even the links of the company with say the party or the state?
Well, the company claims to have extensive partnerships across defense and intelligence in China. Many of the partners it claims to work with key components of the Chinese intelligence apparatus. Many have contracts in places like Xinjiang for facial recognition databases. A number have been involved in large-scale big data collection. The only thing that's different about this case is that we have the data from the big data collection. The interesting thing here is that China works quite regularly through third-party contractors, particularly in the cyber espionage space. We've seen pretty extensive use of third-party contractors by the Ministry of State Security to engage in intellectual property theft. Most of the intellectual property theft teams that regularly operate as part of things like APT-10 and APT-1 are contractors that sit in independent companies but work towards common purpose. Much of the data in this database shares a common usefulness in terms of targeting and profiling both the human terrain, the influence terrain, the intelligence terrain, and the technology terrain of the countries which are collected on. Much of that wouldn't be particularly useful for open source assessment by newspapers and things like that, but would be very useful for the targeting of intelligence operations. So the sorts of data that we see here are what we would expect to see in the terrain of collection for the targeting of intelligence operations. There are also some classification tags and things like that in the database, although those aren't definitive. However, by looking at the institution, by who it claims to work with, and the sort of data it collects, it gets us a fair way to understanding who they are and what they intend to do with the data.
Angus, the final question to you. Given the relations that you kind of described as prickly between Australia and China, how do you look at the sensitivities that it would kind of touch upon in Australia amongst the lawmakers? Is it a huge concern? Will it become a huge concern for say the Australian establishment or the government when it kind of understands that the variety or the depth and breadth of the individuals being tracked or monitored?
Yeah, I think there will be a great deal of concern here. around this sort of very large collection on individuals here in Australia. I think the politicians and the retired officials and even some of the resource company heads will not be too surprised that they are subjects of interest for foreign governments. But I think where it really will touch a raw nerve will be just the size and scope of the collection, just how the sheer number of people on it, and also the number of civilians on it. So those that would not ordinarily be targeted or profiled. And that includes, family members of politicians, business people that are working in, software and technology type areas who wouldn't expect to be the target of this sort of operation. So look, as part of the sort of broader sweep of Australia-China relations, I think this will be another, brick in the wall, if you like, another point of friction between Canberra and Beijing, and one of very many. We've had a difficult relationship over the last couple of years, and I think, the little trust that is left, a little bit more of that will be eroded as a result of this database.
Thank you, Chris, Angus, and Robert for joining me. Thank you so much.